She wasn't armed. She wasn't resisting. She was just picking up her daughter from school when the white police officer wrapped his hand around her throat. "You are choking me," she shouted. But before we continue, tell us where you are watching from in the comments, subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you won't miss any upcoming stories. Florida, late afternoon. The kind of golden light that softens everything it touches. The cracked sidewalks, the painted curbs, the old brick walls of an elementary school that has seen decades of first days, last days, scraped knees, spelling bees, and parent-teacher conferences. It's the kind of day that doesn't whisper trouble. It disguises it. Erica walks through that warmth like any other mother. Her steps are unhurried, almost gentle. She isn't running late. She isn't rushing. She's right on time. That small, tender window of the day where mothers and fathers line up, waiting to fold their children back into their arms. She wears jeans faded at the knees, a loose t-shirt tucked under a light jacket, and a thin gold chain that rests quietly against a collarbone. Her hair is pulled back, simple, practical. Her hands are empty, no weapon, no bag, no shield. Only her heartbeat and the quiet expectation of seeing her daughter. She's not the driver of the car she arrived in. Her sister pulled up to the curb, left the engine off, locked the doors, and walked with her toward the school gate. A simple, forgettable act repeated in thousands of neighborhoods across the country every single day. A parking space, a few feet from the gate. No raised voices, no flashing lights. Just an ordinary afternoon. But hidden in the stillness, something waits. The school gate is busy but calm, the way a well-rehearsed routine always is. Teachers wave as children pour out of the doors. Some kids run, their backpacks bouncing wildly behind them. Others drag their feet, reluctant to leave their friends. Parents gather in little clusters, talking about homework, groceries, gas prices, football practice. Nobody expects the air to change. Erica spots her daughter before her daughter spots her. It's always like this. A little head of tight curls, a purple backpack with a frayed unicorn patch on the corner. For just a second, everything in her world narrows down to that smile. The way her daughter's eyes light up when she sees her. The way her feet leave the ground for that sprint into her arms. She steps closer to the gate. She doesn't notice the man in uniform at first. The badge catches the sunlight just right, throwing a sharp glint into the air. He stands a few steps away from the intersection, legs planted, chest forward, posture wide. Not a teacher, not a parent, a police officer. He watches a flow of people with a stillness that isn't peace. It's control. And then, like a stone rolling into a river, he shifts his weight. 1 step, 2 steps. His shadow cuts across the sidewalk like a thin, dark blade. "Ma'am, hold up." The voice comes steady, practiced, but there's an edge buried beneath it. An authority that isn't asking, it's telling. Erica turns slightly, the smile still hanging onto her lips, confused but polite. "Yes." "Is that your vehicle?" She follows his finger. It's pointing at the car, her sister's car, parked by the curb with the windows rolled up. A small, sensible sedan, old but clean. She shakes her head lightly. "No, sir, it's not mine. I'm just here to pick up my daughter." The officer's jaw tightens. It's subtle, but it happens. A movement as quick as the flick of a lighter. His eyes narrow, not in surprise, but in calculation. You can't just leave a vehicle sitting there. That's illegal parking. It's unattended. She tilts her head slightly. The driver went inside to get something. I'm not the driver. I'm just a passenger. For most officers, or rather, for any rational human being, this would be the end of the conversation. A nod, tell them to move it when they get back. And that would be it. But he doesn't move on. He steps closer. In the background, a bell rings. The final bell. Children's laughter spills into the air like birdsong. Parents wave. Teachers call out last reminders. The world around them continues like a scene on loop. But inside the small, tightening bubble, time starts to thicken. The officer doesn't ask if she's waiting for someone. He doesn't say, "Okay, I'll wait." Instead, his tone shifts, almost imperceptibly, from protocol to pressure. I'm going to need to see your license. My license? She repeats, surprised but not defensive. Sir, I'm not driving. It's not my car. He repeats it, slower. I said, I need to see your license. Something in the air changes then. It's not visible, but it's felt. The subtle tilt when power begins to flex itself in places it doesn't belong. Erica looks around, instinctively. No one is paying close attention yet. A few parents glance over, then look away, assuming it's a normal routine check. But she feels it, a quiet alarm in her chest. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't step forward. She just says again, clearly, it's not my car. I'm just standing here. The officer doesn't blink. He doesn't nod. He leans in, just enough to cast a shadow over her shoes. You can either show me some ID, or we can do this the hard way. The words aren't shouted. They don't need to be. They carry weight not because of volume, but because of history. This isn't the first time someone like him has stood in front of someone like her, deciding that compliance isn't about rules. It's about control. Her pulse quickens, but her face remains composed. This is not the first time she's been spoken to like this, but it's the first time it's happening at her daughter's school gate, a place she believed was safe. Behind the gate, her daughter waves. She hasn't seen the officer yet. She's just excited to go home. She mouths the word mommy to the metal bars, a soundless, innocent call. Erica raises a hand to wave back, trying to keep her voice calm, steady. Sir, with all due respect, I don't have to show you my license. I'm not operating a vehicle. It should have been enough. But the thing about moments like this is, they never unfold logically. They unfold to the silent choices of men who believe the badge on their chest gives them power over who matters and who doesn't. The officer's face hardens. Step over here, he orders, pointing toward the curb. She blinks, confused. For what? Step over here, he repeats. The softness has left his tone completely now. It's all weight and sharpness. People are starting to notice. Not everyone, not all at once, but a few parents nearby slow their steps. A teacher frowns from a distance. A father holding his child's hand turns slightly, as though unsure if he should intervene or keep walking. There's that collective hesitation, the kind that sits between curiosity and fear. Erica doesn't step forward. She isn't being combative. She isn't resisting. She just stands her ground, confused. This isn't supposed to be happening. Not here. Not now. Not over something so small. Sir, she says, I'm just here for my child. That's it. But the officer hears none of that. Or maybe he hears it and doesn't care. He moves closer again. His boots scuff against the pavement. His hand rests lightly on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough. Just a reminder of what he wears. A reminder of what she doesn't. Somewhere behind them, a car door slams shut. A bird calls from a tree. The world is still moving, but inside this narrowing circle, everything is starting to slow down. Erica swallows hard. She's aware of her breathing now, aware of the space between them shrinking, aware of her daughter behind the gate, still waving, still unaware. She says again more firmly, it's not my car. But the officer's eyes are already locked into something else. That cold, quiet place where decisions are no longer about reason but about assertion. He says, ma'am, if you don't comply, you're going to have a problem. And just like that, an ordinary afternoon becomes a loaded moment. The sound of traffic hums in the distance. The smell of freshly cut grass mixes with the heat rising from the pavement. A bell clangs against a flagpole somewhere, loose in the wind. All these ordinary details hang suspended, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Erica doesn't know yet that this exact second, this tiny, fragile sliver of time, will be replayed over and over again on screens across the country. That people she's never met will freeze the frame here, pointing out the way the officer shifts his weight, the way she stands, the way nothing dangerous is happening, and yet everything dangerous is. She doesn't know yet that this is the last moment before storm. She just knows she's standing in front of a man who has decided she is a problem. The officer lifts his chin slightly, scanning the street. His partner isn't here. He doesn't need one. His voice carries the confidence of someone who knows the system stands behind him no matter how small the incident. I need to see some identification. Right now. Erica inhales slowly. She's not trembling. She's not yelling. She's doing everything society tells people like her to do in these moments. Stay calm. Be respectful. Don't escalate. Don't make sudden moves. She's standing still. But what she doesn't control is his intent. A few feet away, a small group of parents are murmuring quietly. A woman in a red blouse leans toward her friend, whispering, "What's going on?" A man folds his arms, watching closely but saying nothing. Children keep streaming out, clutching their backpacks, looking up at their parents' faces for cues they can't quite read. Her daughter notices the officer now. Her smile falters, her step slow. Confusion crosses her little face. She doesn't understand the language of authority yet. She only understands tone. And the tone coming from the man in uniform isn't kind. Erica gently raises a hand to reassure her. A mother's instinct. To say everything's okay without words. To protect her child from panic. Even as the ground starts shifting beneath her own feet, the officer tilts his head, his lips pressed together into something between a sneer and a smirk. The kind of expression that has lived on too many faces in too many encounters like this one. "This is your last warning," he says. The warning isn't about the law. It's about power. In this moment, the line between ordinary and extraordinary, between safety and danger, is as thin as a yellow strip painted along the curb. One wrong step, one wrong breath, one wrong interpretation, and everything changes. Erica isn't a lawyer. She isn't an activist. She's a mother picking up her daughter from school. But she understands on a cellular level what this moment is. She's lived long enough to know that sometimes it's not about what you did. It's about who you are in front of the wrong person at the wrong time. She glances at the car again, the harmless, silent car that started all this. Her sister is still inside the building, unaware. The world hasn't caught up to this moment yet. But it will. "Sir," she says again, softer this time, "I didn't do anything wrong." The officer exhales sharply through his nose, not because of her words, but because he's already decided they don't matter. He steps closer, and for the first time since she arrived, Erica feels the air press against her chest. Not from the sun, not from the crowd, from him. The school gate creaks open slightly. Her daughter peers out. Teachers are still distracted, talking to parents, ushering kids across the crosswalk. Life continues around them, unaware that a match is being struck in the middle of it all. But history doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks quietly into the frame. Sometimes it wears a badge. Erica straightens her back. She doesn't step away. She doesn't flinch. She looks him in the eye. It's not defiance, it's dignity. The kind passed down quietly through generations who've had to stand tall when the world wanted them to shrink. The officer, seeing no fear that bends, moves one step closer, and that step, though ordinary, will ripple through everything that follows. It will ignite the escalation. It will turn a peaceful afternoon into a national headline. And it will mark the beginning of a story that should have never been a story at all. But right now, it's just a mother and a man in uniform, a parked car, a school gate, and a line of power being drawn where none should exist. The calm is still holding, but the storm is already here. It's just waiting to break. In that single moment, something in the air shifted. The school gate that always echoed with laughter, footsteps, the rustle of backpacks, and the chatter of children, suddenly fell into a kind of tense silence that only fear knows how to create. Erica stood just a few steps away from her daughter's school, her mind still holding on to the warmth of routine, the quiet joy of picking up her child. But the officer in front of her wasn't holding on to anything warm. His grip on power was already tightening, even before his hands reached for her. The officer asked again, this time not as a question, but as a command disguised in the shape of a question. License. Erica's voice didn't carry defiance. It carried explanation. Calm. Clarity. Truth. She repeated what she had already said. It wasn't her car. She wasn't the driver. She was only a passenger. A mother. A woman waiting to take her child home. But what happens when reason meets a wall that was never built to listen? The moment stretched. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Behind the officer, the American flag near the school gate fluttered lazily in the mild Florida breeze, an almost cruel contrast to the sharp tension growing between them. A few parents looked over, curious at first, then concerned, then frozen. This wasn't the kind of scene they expected at pickup time. The officer didn't lower his voice. He raised it, not because Erica had done anything wrong, but because volume, for some, is power. His voice cut through the air like a sharp edge, pressing against the invisible boundary between authority and intimidation. Then his hand moved, fast, too fast. What began as a routine request turned into something else entirely. His hand caught her wrist. His other hand came down on her shoulder, then around her upper chest, tightening. In the suddenness of it all, the world tilted, and Erica's body, her breath, reacted before her mind could even process the why. She gasped. She tried to pull back. But the space between her body and his authority grew smaller and smaller until it was no longer space at all, but a choke hold of control. Her voice sliced through the gathering crowd like a flare in the night. "You're choking me." That single sentence carried more than pain. It carried generations. It carried fear. It carried the unbearable weight of knowing that sometimes, for people who look like her, moments like this don't end well. Her cry wasn't a whisper. It wasn't meek. It was raw, soaked in a kind of terror only someone who's felt a life slip from their throat can understand. Around them, movement. Eyes widened. Phones lifted. The crowd, made up of parents who just seconds ago were focused on lunchboxes and little hands, now found themselves standing on the edge of something larger, something darker. One mother covered her mouth in shock. A father grabbed his child's hand tightly. A teacher near the gate froze, as if unsure whether to step in or step back. No one was trained for this. No one expected to see a mother's breath stolen at the gate of an elementary school. The officer's face remained cold, controlled, his eyes steady, like a man convinced he was in the right. And that's what made it worse. The absence of doubt, the absence of hesitation. He wasn't hearing her. He wasn't seeing her. He was acting, as though her breath, her fear, her words didn't exist. The pressure around her neck grew. Her knees bent slightly. Her balance faltered. The ground beneath her felt suddenly unstable. Not because it had moved, but because the power dynamic had. The officer loomed above her, like a wall she could not climb. "You're choking me," she cried again, louder this time, her voice cracking not from weakness, but from oxygen leaving too quickly and fear rushing in too fast. Children, small, wide-eyed, innocent, began to cry, their young minds not yet able to untangle what they were seeing, but instinctively understanding it was wrong. A wrongness that didn't need words to explain itself. Wrongness doesn't always come in the form of laws broken. Sometimes, it comes as hands where they don't belong. A ripple moved through the crowd. It started with whispers, then shock, then outrage. But outrage doesn't always rise quickly. Sometimes it hesitates at the threshold of fear, unsure whether to step forward or step back. The officer barked something, sharp, authoritative, words meant to silence, not to explain. His grip tightened like a vice. Erica's head tilted back slightly. Her airways squeezed in ways that sent panic signals ricocheting through her body. Her lungs screamed for space. And then the world slowed. This is the moment where perception fractures. For Erica, time no longer moved in seconds. It moved in frames, flashes, the sun against her skin, the sound of her daughter's laughter echoing in her memory, the bitter taste of fear filling her mouth, the weight of an arm pressing against her throat, the faces of strangers frozen in indecision. Every breath became a battle. But this wasn't a war she started. This was a war she was forced into. The phones went up higher. People began recording. It was no longer just an incident. It was evidence. But evidence doesn't save you when you're struggling for air. Some parents shouted at the officer. One voice cut through. She didn't do anything. It wasn't just a plea. It was a demand, a desperate attempt to inject reason into a situation built on anything but. But the officer didn't loosen his grip. He didn't flinch. In his eyes, he wasn't hurting anyone. He was enforcing the law. But the question hung heavy in the air. What law was being broken? Parking at a school gate? Standing too close to the wrong person? No law had been broken that justified the choke. And yet, here she was, her life narrowing into the space between one breath and the next. Her hands reached instinctively for his arm, not to fight but to breathe, to live, to be. But even that motion, in the eyes of some, can be weaponized. Her need for air could be painted as resistance. Her survival could be framed as aggression. This is the brutal paradox that so many black bodies know too well. Even breathing can be misinterpreted. One parent stepped closer, the sound of their shoes scraping against the pavement like thunder in the tense quiet. But the officer snapped a glare in their direction, the kind of glare that says, interfere and you'll be next. And in that glare, a power dynamic echoed through centuries of history. The crowd grew larger. The whispers grew louder. But no one stepped in. And isn't that the cruelest part? How power doesn't always need justification, just silence around it. Erica's voice wavered. Her throat ached. But she forced the words again, this time a little more desperate, a little more fragile, a little more human. You're choking me. And in those words, the way they trembled, the way they carried both fear and fury, the world watching through those phone screens would later hear more than a cry for air. They would hear a cry for justice. The sirens in the distance didn't belong to another incident. They were already hers. More officers would soon arrive, not to stop what was happening, but to enforce it, to solidify it, to multiply the weight pressing against her. Her child, inside the school, had no idea that outside, the air was turning against her mother. But Erica knew. Mothers always know. The chokehold didn't need to last minutes to leave a scar. Sometimes, seconds are enough to brand a moment into history. And while her airway burned, while the pressure mounted, while the world tilted, the cameras kept rolling. The story was already leaving the school gate and spreading into the world beyond. The contrast was unbearable. The innocence of a school afternoon against the brutality of power on display. Children against cops. Mothers against silence. Breath against chokehold. And it's in moments like this that history doesn't whisper, it screams. Not in words, but in the sound of a mother's voice gasping for air. Her vision blurred slightly. Her knees trembled, but something in her eyes stayed sharp. Something that said, I will not be erased like this. Around her, people began to speak louder now. A few steps forward, some hands shaking, some filming, some shouting for her release. But the officer's grip was not one of a man responding to reason. It was the grip of someone convinced they would face no consequence. The chokehold was no longer about parking. It was about control. And control, when fueled by bias, doesn't need justification. It only needs silence. But silence was breaking. Phones were rolling. Voices were rising. The officer's name would soon be known. The footage would soon be shared. And while Erica struggled for breath, the story that would shake the community was already being written frame by frame, gasp by gasp. The Florida sun was still shining. The birds were still chirping. The flag was still waving. But none of it mattered, because in that moment, the only thing louder than the world outside was the sound of her struggle to breathe inside it. She would remember every detail. The feeling of his forearm against her throat. The disbelief that this was happening at a school. The eyes of strangers staring at her, like a mirror of their own helplessness. The sound of her own voice, hoarse, desperate, cutting through the air. You're choking me. That cry didn't just echo across the parking lot. It would echo across the city. It would ripple into living rooms through the small glowing screens in people's hands. It would become a symbol of power abused, of dignity stripped, of breath stolen. And as the officer leaned in closer, tightening instead of loosening, he didn't know he was being watched by more eyes than he could count. He didn't know that this single act would ignite a storm. He didn't know that the world would hear those 4 words, "You're choking me," and not forget them. Fear spread like smoke. But beneath fear, something else was beginning to form. Anger. Awareness. A realization that what they were witnessing wasn't just about one woman. It was about all the invisible chokeholds the world has learned to ignore. This wasn't just Erica's story anymore. It was becoming everyone's. The officer's grip remained. Her breath faltered, but her voice, raw, shaking, human, cut through the silence once more, branding itself into the memory of everyone who would ever see this footage. She came to pick up her child and left fighting for breath. She asked for nothing more than to exist in peace, but was met with force. And as she struggled beneath the weight of someone else's power, the world around her froze and watched. The crowd would replay this moment in their minds for weeks. The children would dream about it. The parents would speak about it in hushed tones. And the world would see it through screens, through headlines, through hashtags. But Erica, she lived it. She felt it in her throat. She felt it in her chest. She felt it in the way her breath caught on the edge of someone else's authority. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was an escalation, deliberate, brutal, undeniable. And while the officer's name would eventually be printed in reports, it was her words that would echo louder. "You're choking me." A cry that would pierce through time. A cry that would outlive the moment itself. A cry that would fuel the storm that was about to come. The world often tells itself that justice is blind. But in that parking lot, in broad daylight, justice was standing right there, and it turned its head away. Erica's lungs fought for air. The crowd fought with fear. The officer fought no one, because in his mind, he had already won. But he didn't see the camera angles. He didn't hear the whisper of history. He didn't feel the shift in the air that happens when oppression is caught in plain sight. And just like that, the story of one woman at a school gate began to ignite something much bigger than any of them could imagine. Because what happens next will change everything. The moment the chokehold tightened, something subtle yet seismic happened around that Florida school gate. Fear no longer belonged to Erica alone. It began to leak into the crowd, coiling itself around everyone watching. But fear is a strange thing. When pressed hard enough, it fractures, and from its cracks, something else emerges. The tension in the air became almost visible. Thick, heavy, sharp at the edges. You could feel it sitting on people's chests, pressing against their throats, filling the spaces between heartbeats with a kind of trembling disbelief. One woman clutched her phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Another whispered a prayer under her breath, though she didn't know exactly who she was praying to. For seconds, everyone thought, someone will step in, someone official, someone responsible. But no one did. The officer's grip remained locked, like iron welded onto Erica's breath. And just as the collective silence began to settle into something dangerously close to acceptance, two women moved. They weren't police. They weren't activists. They weren't waiting for permission. They were mothers too. One had her hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a school ID lanyard around her neck. The other held a pink lunchbox, still damp from the condensation of a cold drink inside. Neither of them planned to become part of the story. But injustice has a way of choosing its witnesses and demanding they act. They stepped forward, first cautiously, then with a sudden boldness that surprised even them. Their voices weren't rehearsed. They came from somewhere raw and instinctive. They shouted for the officer to let Erica go. Their words didn't come out polished or perfect. They came out urgent. Human. One of them said what everyone else was thinking. She didn't do anything. The officer didn't flinch. He didn't look at them. That made it worse. It was as if Erica's body, their voices, their presence, none of it mattered. He had carved a tunnel vision, and in that tunnel, there was only his authority and her neck. The woman with the lunchbox took another step. She was close now. Her shadow fell on Erica's feet, merging with hers. She reached out, not to fight, not to touch, but to show she would not stand in the background like the others. Her voice cracked through the air. Let her breathe. In that instant, something ancient stirred in the crowd. The memory of all the moments where silence had let brutality pass unchecked. This time, silence was cracking. And once cracks appear, the wall is never the same. The officer barked back. Short, clipped, loud. Words meant to establish dominance, not dialogue. He gestured sharply for them to back off, but they didn't. They stood there, two black women in broad daylight, defying the narrative being written before their eyes. For a heartbeat, time seemed to hold itself still. Then everything happened at once. A second officer arrived, running. Then a third. Their boots struck the pavement in hard, rehearsed rhythm. Their faces didn't carry curiosity. They carried readiness. Not to question what was happening, but to enforce it. The woman with the bun tried to reason with them. She held up her hands, fingers spread wide to show she wasn't a threat. Her voice trembled but didn't break. But their ears were not trained to hear trembling voices. They were trained to respond to perceived defiance. And so, the choreography of force continued. One of the officers grabbed her wrist. Another reached for the woman with the lunchbox. Gasps rippled through the crowd. What began as a confrontation between one officer and one mother was turning into something else entirely. A public display of domination, widening its reach. The sound of children crying pierced through the noise. One little girl shouted for her mother. Her voice was thin, high-pitched, desperate. The kind of cry that doesn't fade easily from memory. Her mother, the woman with the bun, was now being dragged backward. Her shoes scraped the pavement. Her lanyard twisted around her neck. And in her daughter's eyes, everything safe about the world was being rewritten. Erica was still gasping. The chokehold was still there. And now, two other women were in cuffs. Parents shouted, but their voices tangled in a knot of fear and rage. The police barked commands. Children screamed. Phones captured everything. History, once again, was being recorded not in dusty archives, but in shaky vertical footage. One parent whispered, "Oh my God, they're arresting them too." Another muttered, "This is too much." A man in a gray hoodie stood frozen. The way people do when they want to step forward but are terrified of becoming the next headline. The sound of metal handcuffs, snapping shut, cracked through the air like gunfire. Cold steel on warm wrists. The women's dignity, like Erica's breath, was being stripped in broad daylight. And through it all, the officer holding Erica didn't loosen his grip. But the world around him was changing. A teenage boy, barely 16, lifted his phone higher. He had been recording from the start. His hands were steady, almost unnaturally steady. The kind of steadiness that comes when you know what you're filming isn't just a moment. It's evidence. It's truth against denial. He tapped the screen twice. Live. And just like that, the school gate became a broadcast. The crowd didn't realize it yet, but those first few seconds were already being watched by dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The comments started to flood the live stream before the officers even noticed. Words like "what's going on?" and "oh my God, she can't breathe" scrolled across the glowing screen. It didn't take long. These kind of stories never do. They travel like fire finding dry grass. The live stream caught the moment one of the women cried out as they twisted her arms behind her back. It caught the way Erica's lips parted, searching for air. It caught the faces of the officers, firm, detached, unshaken. And most importantly, it caught the silence of those who didn't intervene. Because silence has a sound, too. Some parents turned away, pulling their children closer. Others stood rooted to the ground, unable to process what their eyes were absorbing. A few stepped forward, but only far enough to film, not enough to interfere. The teenage boy whispered himself as he streamed, but the mic picked it up. "This is not right." And thousands heard him. The live stream's numbers climbed, from a few dozen to hundreds, then more. Someone shared it to a local Facebook group. Another tagged a journalist. Within minutes, a storm was forming beyond the school's walls. The officers didn't know it yet, but what they were doing in that corner of Florida wasn't staying there. The woman with the bun was now fully handcuffed. The woman with the lunchbox was on her knees, one officer pressing down on her shoulder, forcing her to ground. Dust clung to her clothes. Her dignity hung in the air like something fragile but unbroken. Her child screamed, a scream so sharp it seemed to slice through the commotion. People turned. One officer turned. But the chokehold on Erica didn't break. And then the crowd began to shift. Something happens in moments like this. A slow, Dangerous realization. People who once thought they were bystanders start to feel the weight of witnessing. And with that weight comes something else. A choice. A man in a blue shirt stepped forward first. He didn't shout. He didn't swing. He simply spoke loudly, clearly. "This is wrong." Another woman echoed him. And another. The officers barked warnings. "Step back. Clear the area. Get out of the way." But the people didn't. Not completely. They lingered on the edges of defiance. For years, so many moments like this had vanished into silence, buried under the crushing weight of official statements and protocol. But this moment wasn't going quietly. It was being carved into digital stone, one frame at a time. The live stream hit 10,000 viewers. Then, 20. Someone tweeted the video link with a caption, "She's being choked." For nothing. That tweet spread like wildfire in a dry forest. People shared it, not because they knew Erica personally, but because they recognized the script one too many times before. And as the digital storm grew, the real one intensified at the school gate. Backup police vehicles arrived. Sirens wailed in the distance, piercing the air like warning bells in an already burning city. The red and blue lights flashed across children's faces, reflecting off their tear-streaked cheeks like cruel fireworks. Erica was finally thrown to the ground. Not gently, not carefully. She hit the pavement with a dull sound of impact. Her palm scraped against the rough surface. A small bruise bloomed across her forearm like a purple flower. And yet, the officer's face remained void of emotion. Just another procedure. The two other women lay face down on the ground, handcuffed, humiliated, their hair tangled, their breaths quickened. Their children watched, some screaming, some silent in a stunned, fragile kind of terror. And all the while, the live stream rolled. The footage was clear. The voices were sharp. No amount of official reports would be able to erase the clarity of that lens. This is how modern revolutions begin, not in planned speeches or organized protests, but in raw, unfiltered moments where truth bleeds into public consciousness. What the officers thought was just another incident was already becoming a story, a shared story, a witness story. Within minutes, local journalists began calling the school. Activists were tagging lawyers. Community organizers were sharing the live stream in group chats. The video reached newsrooms. Screens across Florida lit up with the image of a black mother being choked in front of a school. And in that contrast, children playing just feet away while their mothers were thrown to ground. A nation's old wounds were being reopened. The woman with the lunchbox whispered something under her breath as she lay on the pavement. No one heard her except the teenage boy holding the camera. He would remember those words later when testifying. She said, "They'll say we were loud, but we were just breathing." The officers called for additional units. They weren't trying to calm the crowd. They were trying to contain it, control it, cement their version of the story before it got rewritten by the people. But what they didn't understand, what they never seem to understand in moments like this, is that once truth leaks out into the world, it's no longer theirs to contain. The crowd shifted again. Parents began shouting louder. Some held their phones in the air like shields. A woman in a denim jacket began narrating what she saw, speaking directly into her camera. Her voice shook, but her words were deliberate. This is happening right now, at an elementary school. She didn't do anything. Within 15 minutes, multiple angles of the same event existed. Different phones, different perspectives, all capturing the same truth. By the time the officers loaded the three women into separate patrol cars, the live stream had crossed 50,000 views. It was no longer a local incident. It was a national wound being poked in real time. And then came the twist. A press statement, rushed, rehearsed, from the police chief's office appeared on their official feed just 2 hours later. Instead of accountability, it carried applause. Instead of concern, it carried praise. The chief called the officers' actions measured, professional, and exemplary. Exemplary. That word spread like poison through the community. People replayed the video, stared at the hands around Erica's throat, the knees pressed against the other women's backs, the children crying, and then they read exemplary. The gap between the truth witnessed and the story told was not a gap. It was a canyon. The live stream didn't just show brutality. It showed denial in real time. People flooded comment sections. Hashtags began to trend. Community leaders called emergency meetings. News outlets showed the footage on loop. That 15-second chokehold had become a spark dropped on a field of dry grass, and the wind was already blowing. Back at the school, long after the sirens faded, a quiet stillness settled over the pavement. It smelled faintly of dust, metal, and fear. A few crayons lay scattered where some children had dropped their bags in panic. A single shoe, pink with sparkles, sat abandoned near the curb. But in the digital space, the story was roaring. The teenage boy, whose livestream had ignited it all, sat on his bed that night staring at the view count. He hadn't said much in the video. He didn't need to. The world had heard enough. And somewhere, Erica sat in the back of a patrol car, the bruises on her throat still fresh, unaware that her name was already trending, that strangers were already saying her name in living rooms she'd never stepped foot in, that people were already choosing sides. 2 women, 3 arrests, 1 live stream, a storm. And that is how an ordinary school day becomes a turning point, not through grand speeches or famous faces, but through the chain reaction of ordinary people who decided not to look away. The chokehold was only the beginning. The real battle was about to unfold far beyond the school gate, in courtrooms, on TV screens, in living rooms, in the minds of everyone who watched it and whispered to themselves, "This could have been me. This could have been us." They thought they could control the story. But stories like these are no longer theirs to control. The crowd saw it. The camera captured it. The world is watching. And what happens next will set everything on fire. When a wound is fresh, the sting is immediate. But what cuts deeper is silence. Not the silence of a quiet room. Not the silence after storm. But the silence of a system that chooses not to answer. It has been days since Erica's arrest. Days since her body was pressed against the hood of that patrol car. Since the sound of her voice, choked, strangled, desperate, echoed through the school parking lot. The live stream has already reached hundreds of thousands of screens across the country. Strangers have shared, commented, and raged. Some have wept. Others have marched. But inside the cold walls of the apartment, there is no apology. There is no accountability. Only the quiet hum of a machine that has done this before and gotten away with it. Erica files a formal complaint. She writes every word slowly, her trembling hands still carrying the ghost of that officer's grip on her neck. She reads and rereads every line, as if her truth must be perfect to be heard. She signs a document. She breathes. She hands it over. She expects the system to move. She expects justice to stir, however slowly. But what greets her is nothing. No call. No letter. No message of acknowledgement. Her words disappear into a void that has swallowed countless others before hers. Weeks pass. The bruises fade from her skin, but they deepen in her memory. Every morning, she checks her phone, waiting for something, anything. Every night, she looks at her daughter, who asks with wide, innocent eyes, "Mommy, did they say sorry yet?" "No, sweetheart, they didn't." But the silence isn't ignorance. It's strategy. Behind the scenes, the department is not idle. They are aligning their shields, crafting their language, building a wall, brick by brick, word by word. They know how to wait. They know how outrage burns bright but fades fast. They've done this before. Inside the chief's office, a carefully prepared statement sits on polished mahogany. It's not written to comfort Erica. It's not written to protect the community. It's written to protect the department. When the cameras finally appear, lined up like soldiers, microphones extended like weapons, the chief steps forward, crisp uniform, straight back, a practiced calm in his voice that comes not from truth, but from rehearsal. "Our officers follow protocol," he says. The words roll out smooth, almost rehearsed like a chorus sung too many times before. There was no excessive force. There was no misconduct. We stand by their actions. The world hears these words. The parents who saw the choking. The mothers who screamed for it to stop. the millions who watched it unfold live on their phones. And they feel the gap, the chasm, between what they saw with their own eyes and what the system claims. It is denial dressed in authority. It is power using its voice to drown out the truth. The officers are not suspended. They are not investigated. They are praised. Erica watches the press conference from her small living room. She's wearing the same sweatshirt she wore the day she filed complaint. A faded blue fabric now soaked with quiet fury. Her daughter sits beside her, small hand curled in her palm. The chief's face fills the screen. His smile is slight, controlled. His words slice through the air like a blade, without blood. There was no excessive force. Erica's jaw tightens. Her heart pounds, so hard it feels like the room is shrinking around her. She remembers the officer's hand closing around her neck. She remembers her knees hitting the pavement. She remembers the sound of children screaming. She whispers to herself, barely audible, "They're lying." But the lie is not new. The lie is ancient. It's the same lie whispered in courtrooms, muttered in reports, sealed behind closed doors. The same lie that turns victims into suspects. The same lie that turns brutality into protocol. Viral outrage grows louder online. People post. People share. But the system is built to withstand noise. It doesn't flinch at trending hashtags. It doesn't shake at angry comments. It doesn't fear the crowd outside its doors. Because power doesn't need to shout. It only needs to wait. And Erica, she is trapped in that waiting. She has done what they told her to do. She filed a complaint. She trusted the process. But the process was never built for her. Outside, protesters march, their voices colliding with the wind. Placards rise into the sky, painted with names of those who never received justice. But inside her home, the quiet is unbearable, because behind every protest chant, there's a woman waiting to be heard. The department's silence is followed by its defense. The officers release their reports. Cold, mechanical, sanitized. They call it a lawful detention. They claim she was non-compliant. They twist every second of the footage to fit their narrative. Not because the footage lies, but because power can choose which part of truth to speak. And then comes the sting. In a late-night segment, a local news anchor repeats the police statement without question. Authorities confirm the arrest followed standard procedures, she says. The anchor moves on to the weather. For them, it's just another story. For Erica, it's a knife. The next morning, Erica walks into the police station. Not as a suspect, not as a criminal, but as a woman demanding to be heard. She stands at the counter, clutching a copy of her complaint like a shield. The clerk barely looks up. The officer behind the glass speaks through a mic, his voice flat, detached. "Ma'am, the case is under review." She asks, "How long?" He shrugs. "As long as it takes." She's not a priority. She never was. Outside the station, the world is moving on. The video that burned through timelines like fire has already been replaced by something else. Another headline. Another outrage. But for Erica, this isn't a moment. It's her life. She sits on a park bench across the street. The police station looms like a fortress. She watches officers go in and out. They laugh. They chat. They drink coffee. The same building where a complaint now sits buried under files, collecting dust. She clenches her fists. The sun beats down, but her skin is cold. And yet, in the cracks of the system, something else is brewing. Community leaders begin to speak up. Not because the system listened, but because they refused to be silent. Black mothers, church leaders, high school teachers, college students. They organize. They push. They make noise. But the department still denies. When the chief gives a second statement, his tone is sharper. "This department will not be intimidated," he says. He stands flanked by officers, their hands crossed in unity. This was by the book. By the book. 3 words that have protected countless wrongs. Meanwhile, Erica's lawyer submits a second complaint. This time with the video attached, time-stamped, annotated, undeniable. And still nothing. Each second of silence is an insult. Each ignored email is a slap. Each unanswered call is a reminder. This isn't a fair fight. Erica begins to lose sleep. Her daughter wakes at night, crying from dreams she can't explain. She remembers the flashing lights, the shouting, the moment her mother was taken away. No child forgets the moment they learn their parent isn't safe. When Erica appears on a small local podcast, she speaks softly but firmly. She tells her story, not with rage, but with a steady, unshakable calm, because she's learned something powerful. The louder the system denies her, the clearer her voice must become. She tells the host, "They want me to give up, but if I give up, what happens to the next woman? The next mother? The next child who watches this happen and learns to fear?" The host doesn't interrupt, because some stories silence the room. The city grows uneasy, not because the department cares, but because the people don't stop talking. The video resurfaces. It trends again. New voices pick it up. National figures, journalists, advocates. The department's silence has become too loud to ignore, but still they hold their ground. In the dark of her room, Erica scrolls through comments. Strangers tell her to stay strong. Others question her story. Some hurl hate. She feels everything and nothing all at once. Her heart is tired, but her fight isn't. She looks at the complaint number on the paper by her bed. She whispers, "You'll not disappear." Back at the station, the chief meets with his advisors. They discuss optics. They discuss public perception. They do not discuss Erica. To them, she's not a woman. She's a file, a number, a problem to manage. The system believes time will break her. But Erica has learned something in the silence. Time does not only belong to them. She begins gathering evidence. She connects with community attorneys. She shares her story at town halls. She becomes a voice they tried to erase. Her tears harden into resolve. Her fear sharpens into clarity. Her silence becomes her weapon. But the department is unmoved. They double down. They protect their own. They repeat the same line. Our officers follow protocol. Their refusal isn't just defiance. It's a message to anyone watching. We decide what happened. Not you. The protesters chant louder. Media vans crowd the front steps. The chief stands behind the podium again. Cameras flash like lightning. The situation is being handled internally, he says. A storm of practice, words meant to sound like control. But the cracks in his armor begin to show. For the first time, a reporter asks a question he doesn't like. For the record, Chief, if this was by the book, why does the footage show the officer choking an unarmed woman who committed no crime? The chief stiffens. His jaw tightens. He redirects. The room feels attention. In living rooms across the country, people are watching, not because they expect justice to be handed to Erica, but because they know the story. They've seen it before. Different names, different cities, same denial, same defiance, but something feels different now. Not louder, sharper, like a blade finding its mark. And just when it seems the wall is too high to climb, a whisper spreads through the legal circles of Miami. A powerful figure has seen the footage, but Erica doesn't know this yet. She sits on her couch, watching the chief on TV, denying her reality again. Her fingers curl around her daughter's hand. The TV light flickers across their faces. And beneath her anger, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the bruises that never fully heal, something else burns quietly. Defiance, not the defiance of power. The defiance of truth that refuses to die. Because while the chief may have the podium, Erica has the truth. And truth has a way of finding a voice. Erica doesn't know it yet, but her fight has reached the ears of someone who won't let it disappear. Hit subscribe if you believe no voice should ever be buried beneath power. Justice begins when silence is broken. There are moments in history when silence becomes too loud to ignore. Moments when whispers buried deep in corridors of power begin to echo like thunder. And in Florida, in the quiet hum of a justice chamber far away from flashing cameras, something begins to stir. For weeks, Erica's story had been treated like a footnote. Another incident, another headline, another fleeting spark in a long list of injustices. But on this day, That spark begins to burn. Inside the polished marble walls of the justice's private office, an unease lingers in the air. The case that was meant to fade into background refuses to die. The footage refuses to be forgotten, and the system that once appeared untouchable starts to tremble. Because one man, one figure power, a black chief justice with decades of scars etched into his memory, has decided enough is enough. He doesn't make speeches. He doesn't call press conferences. He simply acts. Power doesn't always move with noise. Sometimes it moves in absolute silence. A single call travels through encrypted lines, not to press, not to the mayor, but to the Internal Affairs Division buried deep beneath the layers of public statements and polished lies. That call sets off a chain of movements that most citizens will never see. Paper trails long hidden are quietly pulled from dusty filing cabinets. Complaints once labeled unsubstantiated are reviewed line by line. Behind every official report lies a redacted truth. Behind every no evidence found hides a buried story. And one name keeps reappearing. The officer who laid hands on Erica. A name that surfaces in 5, 6, 7 different complaints. Mothers, fathers, young men, teenagers. People whose stories never reached the evening news. For years, these complaints were buried under protocol, stamped with the words, "Case closed." But now, nothing stays buried forever. While the city moves on as if nothing happened, something is building beneath the surface. Injustice has a rhythm, a heartbeat. And right now, that heartbeat is accelerating. The Chief Justice orders an independent inquiry. Not the kind designed to buy time. Not the kind that drags on for years. But a fast, targeted, surgical probe. One that cuts through the shields and layers of bureaucracy the department has built like armor. This is not about one woman anymore. It's about a pattern. The investigators begin to dig. They knock on doors no one else dared to. They speak to people who were silenced, shamed, or ignored. And one by one, voices begin to rise. A man in his 50s recalls how the same officer dragged him out of his car in front of his daughter. A teenage boy, now a college student, shares the night he spent in a cell for resisting arrest. Though he had simply asked, "What did I do wrong?" An elderly woman, trembling, remembers the grip of that officer's hand on her wrist. For the first time, their stories aren't dismissed. They're recorded, documented, amplified. News doesn't break all at once. It builds, quietly, slowly like pressure behind a dam. First, it begins as a whisper among legal circles. Have you heard? Internal Affairs is looking into that case again. Then it spreads to a few reporters who never stop caring. And soon, that whisper grows teeth. Midway through a sleepy Thursday morning, a headline hits the local online bulletin. Officer accused of excessive force faces new investigation. A few hours later, a larger outlet picks it up. By evening, it's trending nationally. The department can no longer hide behind carefully worded statements. Their press office scrambles. Emails flood their inbox. The police union prepares its defense. But the truth is already moving faster than their control. For years, the system was designed to protect itself, not its people. But the moment accountability knocks, even the strongest walls can crack. Inside the police department, tension festers. Officers exchange hushed conversations in hallways. Some fear what's coming. Others know what they've seen. Whistleblowers, long silent, begin to feel the air shift. One officer anonymously leaks a crucial document, a record showing that the department had quietly paid settlements in several misconduct cases involving the same officer. Settlements that were never disclosed to the public. The story explodes. Cable news panels debate it. Social media burns with outrage. Civil rights lawyers demand resignations. Activists hold candlelight vigils. Community leaders march. And at the center of the storm stands Erica's story, the spark that ignited a reckoning. But beneath the noise of protests and press conferences, another kind of storm brews, a legal storm. The Chief Justice's office pushes for a special grand jury. Legal teams assemble. Federal investigators join the effort. This is no longer a local issue. It's a national spotlight on the patterns of power and abuse that have plagued communities for generations. The system is not just shaken, it's forced to look at itself. In the weeks that follow, the narrative begins to shift. Where once Erica was portrayed as uncooperative, now her truth is undeniable. Footage replayed across networks reveals every detail. The officer's aggression, the lack of provocation, the fear in the eyes of mothers and children. Every second of that video becomes evidence. Every tear shed that day becomes a symbol of something bigger. A wave of past victims step forward. Some with faces the world will see. Some with voices disguised. But their stories align like constellations, each a point in a larger pattern of systemic abuse. For years, people asked, why didn't anyone speak up before? But the real question was never about speaking. It was about being heard. And now they are. The Justice's team uncovers something chilling. Internal memos reveal that the officer in question was flagged multiple times by supervisors. Each time, the recommendation was further training or verbal warning. Never suspension. Never accountability. Because every time a complaint was filed, someone in power decided the image of the department was more important than the pain of the people. This is not an isolated case. It's a blueprint. And for the first time, that blueprint is being torn apart, piece by piece. In communities across Florida, people gather around their screens watching the coverage. For many black families, it is not surprising. It is confirmation. Confirmation of what they've lived through, what they've whispered to their children about. How to act when you see the flashing lights. How to keep your hands visible. How to survive a system not built to protect you. But something different lingers in the air now. Hope. Not naive hope, but the kind forged in fire. The officer's name trends on every platform. But it's not just his face the world sees. It's the faces of those who were silenced. Their stories are now the story. Public pressure grows. City council members demand answers. State legislators call for hearings. The police chief, once confident, once untouchable, now faces microphones, flashbulbs, and a growing crowd outside his headquarters. The department releases a statement late one night. We are cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation. But cooperation is no longer their choice. It's a demand. The Chief Justice watches everything unfold from his office. He's seen this play out before. Outrage, press conferences, promises. But this time, he intends to push further. He authorizes the release of internal findings. It's a bold move, one that rips away the polished veil of official narratives. Reporters flood the internet with details. The ignored warnings, the buried complaints, the silenced victims. Each paragraph pierces through years of institutional denial. The storm reaches its peak on a humid evening when hundreds of people gather outside the courthouse. Not in anger alone, but in determination. Mothers hold candles. Children carry signs with Erica's name. Men who once stayed quiet stand shoulder to shoulder. And somewhere in that crowd, Erica watches. She's not holding a microphone. She's not leading a chant. But her presence alone speaks volumes. The world sees her not as a suspect, not as a headline, but as a human being, a woman whose pain forced the system to reckon with itself. The Justice steps before the cameras for the first time since this began. His voice is steady, his tone unshakable. This is not about one officer. This is about a culture. A culture that must change, not tomorrow, not eventually, but now. Those words reverberate across the nation. But the reckoning doesn't end with speeches. Legal action follows. The officer is placed on administrative leave, then suspended, then indicted. But the ripple doesn't stop there. An entire chain of command, supervisors, sergeants, internal reviewers, are called to testify. Why were the warnings ignored? Why were the complaints dismissed? Why were the settlements hidden? Questions that once died in dark rooms are now being asked under the blinding light of public scrutiny. And for the first time, there are no easy answers. The department tries to regain control of the narrative. They release old photos of community events, highlight their reforms, remind the public of their commitment. But the people are no longer listening to polished words. They're listening to the truth, a truth carved into the memory of every person who has ever been stopped, questioned, or brutalized for simply existing in the wrong skin. In living rooms across the country, Families watch as commentators dissect the case. Some say justice is finally being served. Others caution that the system has a way of protecting itself in the end. But no one can deny something has shifted. The system has been forced to look at its reflection, and it doesn't like what it sees. Weeks turn into months. Investigations expand beyond this single case. Federal civil rights investigators arrive in Florida. They review not only the officer's record, but the entire department's history of misconduct. What they uncover is damning. Patterns of excessive force, misreported incidents, silenced victims, and financial settlements designed to bury the truth. The justice's quiet move has triggered a reckoning that no one saw coming. Erica, meanwhile, remains at the heart of it all, not by choice but by circumstance. She attends hearings, not as a headline, but as a woman demanding accountability. She speaks softly to other families who come forward. She holds their hands. She listens, because she knows exactly how it feels to scream and not be heard. Her story is no longer just her story. It's a bridge for others to cross. In cities beyond Florida, people begin to talk about their own experiences. Old cases resurface. Journalists reopen files. Lawmakers propose new legislation on use of force and police accountability. What happened on that school sidewalk is now part of a larger movement, a fire that refuses to be contained. But inside the system, not everyone is pleased. There are those who built their careers on silence, those who depended on things staying hidden, and they push back hard. Union leaders hold press conferences. Statements are released claiming the officer is being unfairly targeted. Some politicians call it an overreaction, but the truth doesn't need permission to exist. And this time, it isn't going away. The special grand jury convenes on a stormy morning. Cameras crowd the courthouse steps. Reporters whisper into microphones. Protesters chant outside. Inside, evidence is laid bare, not just footage, but files, testimonies, internal communications. The walls that protected the few at the expense of the many begin to crumble. By the time the verdict comes down, the city feels different. Tense, alert, awake. The officer is charged. The department is placed under federal oversight, and a commission is formed to reevaluate policing standards across the state. No, it doesn't undo the pain. It doesn't erase the past. But for once, the system that once shook others is now the one trembling. In a quiet moment, long after the headlines fade, the Chief Justice walks alone to the courthouse halls. He's seen battles like this before, but he's never seen the ground shift quite like this. He knows this isn't the end. Justice is not a finish line. It's a fight that must be waged again and again. But this time, they've drawn blood from the armor. Erica stands on the steps of that same courthouse. The night is warm. The crowd has thinned. A few candles still burn in the distance, their flames flickering softly in the dark. She looks out, not with triumph, but with quiet strength. She didn't ask to be the face of this fight. She didn't want the cameras, the hashtags, the endless interviews. All she wanted that day was to pick up her daughter from school. But the world had other plans. And now, it can no longer pretend it didn't see. The story doesn't end here. The officer's trial is only the beginning. Policies will be debated. Laws will be rewritten. Lives will be forever changed. But the ripple that began with a single act of injustice has turned into a wave. And waves don't ask for permission. They break. They flood. They reshape the shore. Some will try to rewrite the narrative to make the story neat and clean. But the truth is never neat. It's raw, messy, uncomfortable, and powerful. What happened to Erica is a chapter in a much longer book, a book still being written by countless voices refusing to be silenced. The Chief Justice returns to his office late at night. He picks up the phone. Another call is made. This time, it isn't about one officer. It's about policy, oversight, rebuilding, real change. He knows it will be hard. He knows the backlash will be fierce. But he also knows that history doesn't move on its own. It moves because someone somewhere decides to push. In the shadows of power, something has shifted. A system that once seemed immovable has been shaken. And the tremors are only beginning. Because justice, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep.